Welcome back, everybody, to the Historical Movies podcast. My name is Ross, I'm an editor, and I'm joined by my brother Bryce, Professor of Modern World History at Liverpool Hope University, and historical scriptwriter. Bryce, how are you doing?
Good evening, very good, very good. Ready to get stuck into this one.
Yes, in today's episode, we're looking at The Crying Game from 1992. Set during the backdrop of the Troubles, The Crying Game follows Fergus, an IRA volunteer whose life shifts after guarding a captured British soldier. What begins as a tense political thriller turns into an intimate story about identity, loyalty, and unexpected human connection in a divided world. Bryce, I think there's only one place to start with this movie, perhaps fortuitously. That's with the twist. We get this twist in the middle of this movie. I have to make a plea here. If you do not want this film spoiled, this is probably one of the biggest twists in cinema history. So if you don't know the twist and you don't want to know the twist, go and watch the movie first. That out of the way, is this movie basically overshadowed by the reveal that we get that Dill is not a woman and is actually a man or a transgender person? I bring up this point because there's a review by Richard Corliss in his Time magazine review. He, for example, every first letter of each paragraph in his review wrote out the sentence, "She is a he." And I'm thinking of in Father Ted, there's a one of the episodes, there's a joke where they reference this film, and it's basically like, oh yeah, do you remember that film where the guy gets his lad out, you know? And it's this kind of thing where is the movie basically overshadowed by the twist, and is that a problem? Does it make the movie better, or do people just remember it as the gender reveal movie?
Well, first of all, probably not best to reference Father Ted, given Graham Linehan's the writer of Father Ted's subsequent, shall I say, immersion in the trans debate.
Yes,
I don't know if you're aware of this.
No, I am. Yeah,
but yeah, well, I think in many ways, yes, agrees. But I suppose we've got to put ourselves into the early 90s mindset. And yes, this was, I suppose, sensational, but it's also, to be fair to Neil Jordan, a fairly daring thing to do. Does it? Yeah, I suppose your question is sort of leaning towards, does it sort of cheapen the movie a little?
Yeah.
I don't know. I suppose I can see that argument, but I suppose in terms of like representation of that community, I think it's probably very important as well. But yeah, I suppose I can see the point that, again, that might sort of, cheapen the whole issue in general. I mean, did you? I mean, the problem is with this movie, because it's become, as you just referenced there, such a sort of staple of pop culture, referenced, in many different things. Like when I watched this, like I already knew the twist. I imagine you did as well. So again, it's hard to kind of put ourselves into, being in the cinema and letting out a gasp as a cock appears on screen.
Yeah. Well, that's the point. I think basically rephrase this question: did you know the twist before you watched the movie? And I did, because it's become a sort of as you say, a cultural phenomenon, which I suppose has ruined some aspects of this movie to me. I still think it's an absolutely fabulous movie. I really enjoyed watching it, but I kind of think that it kind of gets a bit overshadowed by this twist. But then again, how are you gonna? How else? That's the point of the movie, isn't it? How else are you going to make this film? So it's, I don't know, damned if you
knew, damned if you Jimmy. I thought you knew.
Why did you come to the bar? Great. I've got a few problems as well with this movie. I don't know how you think about this.
I actually come back to that point of going to the bar. It does. All right. Okay. Again, the Irish context here. Stephen Rea, perhaps a naive, presumably Catholic lad, although Stephen Rea himself is of Protestant background, but his character, naive lad, maybe coming over to the big schmuck, and does he really not realise that it's a not just a gay bar, but a trans bar? I mean, does he really not clock it after being there quite often?
Well, this is the thing. I had a feeling as well. This came out in 92.
Yeah,
and it appears from doing research that the audiences found the twist, like I think a few cinemas said, oh, there was a bit of a walkout or whatever, and people were kind of shocked, or some people laughed and some people gasped and things like that. But is it almost, if they made this film now, I think there would be almost more of a shocking reaction to it now. it seems to be more of an issue now in some ways. Whereas for 92, it's very progressive that this film was made in 92.
I think we're living in, dare I say, quite transphobic times, certainly here in these aisles, and there's been a pushback against probably some of the occasional excesses of the broad trans agenda. I want to be very careful in terms of what I say here, but I completely take your point there. And I find when we talk about cinema goes reactions, did anyone violently vomit at the sight of a cock as Stephen Rea does, which I've always found like quite a almost ridiculous reaction in itself, to sort of run to the toilet and throw your guts up. Although, I suppose he was suffering some kind of post-traumatic stress / trauma there. But yeah, I think you're right. In some ways, we're living in like kind of less accepting times. We've talked a lot on this podcast about that golden age of the early 90s of the Cold War has been resolved, and everyone's marching towards a progressive and inclusive future, which I think this is. Well, I think most of Neil Jordan's movies kind of fit with it. That's obviously his period really of filmmaking, and they fit within that bracket, don't they? So yeah, different times.
Yeah, coming back to your point, it's a good point about the fact that he is physically sick at the point. But I think I suppose this movie in many ways is about identity, and set during the backdrop of the Troubles, which we'll get onto later. And I suppose that he's having some kind of complete identity shock, which is the point of the scene. And the way it's done, if to my memory, obviously there's a pan down, and then the member is revealed, so to speak. But we get kind of isn't there some music playing, and the music kind of suddenly stops, or have I imagined that? So I think it's supposed. And this film came into a little bit of criticism with some members of, I don't know what you would say, the trans community. And I know people listen to this podcast, I'm sure, to listen to two middle-aged white men talk about trans issues or whatever. But it came in for a bit of criticism that we're viewing this whole aspect through Stephen Rea's character's eyes. And to be honest with you, fine, but that's the point of the movie. That's, he's the main character. We're seeing his identity crisis, or his shifting views on identity, or whatever it is, the point of this movie, through his eyes. So, yeah.
Well, quite. I mean, I suppose I always wondered on this, should we not give people a little recap of the plot before we jump into our analysis, don't we? I mean,
I gave a little summary at the beginning, 2-sentence summary of the movie, but basically his character Fergus, Stephen Rea, is guarding a prisoner who they want to exchange for an IRA person, Forrest Whitaker. Then this movie switches from a sort of political thriller when he goes over to England, and it kind of very seamlessly, very impressively transforms into a sort of, I don't know, a romance kind of, sort of human story narrative. And then he meets this Dill, who was Jodie's, that's Forrest Whitaker's character's partner. And then because he feels the guilt that Jodie has died, I'm not explaining this very clearly. You have to watch the movie. And so then he gets entangled in this kind of relationship, and I read someone's review saying that he's not in love with her. He's in love with forgiveness or the guilt, which is a very interesting way of looking at it, which I think is very, very correct. So that's the background. I want to bring up the point. Actually, I'm glad we mentioned that, because there's some things in this movie that, which I was happy to forgive, because I think this is a really good movie. But what is going on with the IRA team in this movie? First of all, like, he's becoming all chummy with the prisoner. Then he's, the main boss guy, Peter, lets him guard Forrest Whitaker's characters on the last night, even though he clearly has formed some kind of bond. Then to kill him, he seems to be happy to let him take him off on his own. Like, oh, you don't worry, I trust you to go off and kill him. Like, it's completely ridiculous, isn't it? And then there's this weird scene where Forrest Whitaker's character starts running away, and they're sort of taunting each other a bit like children, even though Stephen Rea is supposed to be trying to murder him. It's very strange. And then we get the shot of him being run over by an armored car. And it's I don't know, that part of the movie was a bit strange to me. David Cronenberg, who was the guy who directed The Fly and is sort of instrumental in body horror genre. He said that this movie copped out because Stephen Rea's character should have killed Forrest Whitaker's character, because in his words, it would have made the movie so much more powerful because his guilt would have been so much greater. Do you think he's got a point?
Right. To answer that, I think we need to go back, if you'll indulge me, to what this movie rips off. And well, first of all, yeah, I suppose I can understand what's been said there in terms of, I will never forget interviewing the former head of the British military, and that recently deceased Lord Guthrie, and him telling me that the Provisional IRA in his long military career were by far the most impressive, ruthless, and organised fighting force he'd ever come up against. And this is the man who'd been involved in Bosnia, Iraq, you name it. So yes, is there amateur-ishness believable to that level? To a degree, no. On the other hand, your man, what's his name? That actor, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph and the Little Donkey.
Sorry, which character? The Peter character?
No, the guy who says in his most famous acting role, which is in the British police drama, he says his catchphrase is Jesus, Mary, Joseph, and the Little Donkey. Adrian Dunbar, who's the
right? Okay,
he's the
yes, he's the head. Yes,
right?
So I didn't know that reference. Go on.
So he refers to Rea as a volunteer. You got to remember, he addresses him as a volunteer. This is a guerrilla army. These are volunteers, which brings me back to my bigger point as to what this movie rips off, which makes it essentially, it is an Irish movie, because there is a very famous short story by a very famous Irish writer, Frank O'Connor, who was a writer who had served in the IRA during the revolutionary struggle in Ireland in the 1920s. And O'Connor afterwards set to writing and was very famous, got published especially in the New Yorker, and very big in America. And one of O'Connor's most famous novellas is called Guests of the Nation, published in, I think, the 1930s. And Guests of the Nation depicts a scene out in the west of Ireland in the War of Independence. Not obviously, this is set in the modern Troubles, 80s and the 90s. We're going back to the independence struggle in the 1920s. And in this short story, you have two British prisoners who are taken hostage by the Irish Republican Army, who are under their guard, and there are 4 IRA prisoners who they are trying to make a deal for their mutual release. When those IRA men are killed by the Crown forces, the order is then given for those 2 British soldiers to be killed. But crucially, in the meantime, the point of the book and subsequently the play is that the 2 British soldiers have actually formed a really nice bond with their 2 IRA captors, the 2 guys who are assigned to look after them. So the Crying Game, I think, I'm sure unapologetically would acknowledge that it completely rips off Frank O'Connor's Guests of the Nation in terms of that scenario, and in terms of just the humanity of getting to really relate to your captor, your captors, and vice versa. And I don't think that that's a too far flung a notion. And but to come back to that criticism you mentioned there, is it a cop out? I think not. However, in Guests of the Nation, again, spoiler alert for anyone who wants to read the book or watch the play, the 2 British soldiers are executed by their new best mates, who are the 2 IRA lads, who then feel a profound sense of, similar to Stephen Rea in this movie, a profound sense of dislocation from the struggle, identity crisis, sadness, and confusion. So what am I trying to say here? It's a different twist on that story, but I'm sure even if we had Neil Jordan here, he'd admit that it's completely ripped off from that 1930s very famous book and play and scenario, which is not unique to Irish history, of course. In fact, again, if you just permit me, I've been reading, since we're recording this video, I've been reading Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, Mr. Sherlock Holmes fame, Tales of Unease, which is his collection of horror stories and ghost stories. And there's one here, The Lord of Chateau Noir, which is a story set in the Franco-Prussian War in the 1870s, which again is a very similar scenario where a German occupying soldier is taken captive by a Norman lord and his peasants, and basically sort of tortured. So that whole scenario of like captive, my captive, that kind of, and the kind of dialogue between them is something which I suppose is a literary trope more broadly. But for this movie, to come back to that question, it's the complete rip-off of Guest of the Nation. Of course, Guest of the Nation, being written in the 1930s, doesn't have a subsequent romantic plot twist with a trans individual in London.
No, really?
Which would be completely anachronistic. So that's my long-winded answer.
So not a cop-out, but a rip-off.
Agreed.
Yes. I agree with you. Actually, I don't think it is a cop-out that he feels enough guilt. He doesn't have to actually pull the trigger. We should then mention, I think you've segued very nicely then into the historical context, because that disconnection or dislocation that Fergus feels in a number of times in this movie sort of mirrors the political, social issues around the Troubles, and people feeling, the whole psychological element of informers and undercover agents and murders and all that kind of psychological trauma. It basically, I think the point of this movie is look at putting that under the microscope. But I just want to get your expert sort of background on why this movie fits so well with the Troubles. I mean, let's not forget that, in the early 90s in Britain, 1990, when was it? In 1991, there was an attack, a mortar attack on 10 Downing Street, where the Prime Minister lives. So this is the backdrop that the IRA parked a van a couple of 100 meters from Downing Street and fired off homemade mortars, and one exploded in the garden whilst John Major, the Prime Minister, was having a cabinet meeting. If it had been 10 or 20 meters, to one side, it would have killed the cabinet. So that's the backdrop that this movie is in. We kind of forget that now, but the Troubles were, blowing up all across the British Isles. And I just want to get your historical background on that conflict and why it's relevant for this movie.
Yeah, well, if anyone thinks any of this, to directly address that and come back to your earlier question about sort of, believability, if anyone thinks that, it's unbelievable that, a guerrilla group would be, as depicted here, so ruthlessly efficient. I mean, there was a bomb going off every week or every other week. I mean, yes, the mortar attack on Downing Street. Let's not forget the 80s. The attack on the Brighton the Grand Hotel, which very nearly killed sitting Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah.
Look, we were growing up at this time, and it was an awful time because it was such a violent time. I think you have to be. I watch my words carefully here. I think the impressiveness of the IRA has always struck me in terms of the impressive penetrability of the IRA, the Provisional IRA. I do though think that this film came out in '92. I think I think it really reflects a war weariness on behalf of everyone at the time. We all know that the IRA, the Republican movement, had been moving more towards, well, to go back to the 80s, and again, horrible, the hunger strikes and the Armalite and the ballot box, which meant, we'll embrace politics as well as violence. And we all know now, of course, that the likes of Gerry Adams was pulling the IRA in that direction. Very difficult thing to do. The armed wing of the struggle. This is released in '92. Huge amount of war weariness. The year after '93 sees one of the worst IRA atrocities, which is the killing of two innocent little boys in Warrington in a bomb attack, which, leads to what I'm trying to say is not shortly after this movie, you've got the first big IRA ceasefire of the 1990s. That subsequently breaks down in 96 with the Canary Wharf bombing. But we're on the road to the Good Friday Agreement of 1998, and we're at the stage already where everyone's really quite jaded in some ways by this horrific conflict.
Yeah.
And of course that's embodied, isn't it, in Stephen Rea's character there. So there's a deeper Irish historical and literary context to the Republican struggle. But I think, in terms of its situatedness in the 90s, what Jordan has probably captured quite well is that kind of growing disillusionment with the struggle. Now, what you've got to mention here, which really demands mention, is the fact that Stephen Rea, of course, was married for years to Dolores Price. Dolores Price, one of the most notorious IRA volunteers of all time. I mean, she's absolutely up there in the pantheon. Herself and her sister Marion Price, they blew up the Old Bailey in the 70s. They went on hunger strike. They were hardline Republican. And the Netflix series, which was brought out last year, Say Nothing, very vividly details. And there's a lot of other books that were brought out about this, most notably the recently deceased Ed Maloney's Voices from the Grave. Dolores Price came from a hardline Republican family. I mean, she was opposed to Gerry Adams and any moves towards peace. She was hard as nails, and she'd done serious time, and she'd done serious things, right? And you've got to remember, Stephen Rea is still married to her at this point. They subsequently divorced in the early mid-noughties. But I think we cannot, again, talking about the historical context, allow it to pass the fact that the member of the cell, or the IRA assassin played by Miranda Richardson, who subsequently goes after Stephen Rea when he's running around in London, bears a striking resemblance in terms of attitude, haircut, etc., to Dolores Price, who would have been Stephen Rea's wife still at this stage. So I think there's some pretty strong historical and like realistic kind of parallels here with this movie.
Yeah, there are a few things you mentioned there. I think it was when we were doing Michael Collins, because that's also same director, and Stephen Rea, it also appears in that movie. That's a great episode, listeners, if you want to go and check that out. We've done Michael Collins. You mentioned, I think, that Stephen Rea was married to, what's her name, Dolores Price?
Dolores Price,
at that point. And I thought, okay, wow, is it true love, or like really in-depth method acting? I don't know. Anyway, but what's interesting about that is that, as far as I understand, Dolores Price accuses Gerry Adams of being way more involved in the IRA than Gerry Adams has said he was. So Gerry Adams is saying that he's, the political, way more involved in the political stuff. Dolores Price has accused him, or has, I think Dolores Price has now passed, but she accused him of being way more involved in the actual, organizing and planning and killing of people. That's just maybe an aside.
Absolutely, but which, let's be honest, the dogs in the street knew that anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
But, the level of involvement of Adams in some very controversial killings in the early Troubles, such as the killing of Jean McConville, which is what the Netflix series focused on, who was, a single mom from a council flat, who was, again, one of the definitely less justifiable targets of the whole Republican campaign. She was very outspoken about that. I mean, very tragic figure. We have to say, in terms of Neil Jordan, in terms of dealing with Irish Republican history, he's done Michael Collins, he's done The Crying Game. He's also, I don't think, and has anyone in the history of film managed to do two movies which straddle militant Irish republicanism and the trans issue? Because
is there another one?
Well, he's done. I don't know if you've seen Breakfast on Pluto with
no,
which is a brilliant movie set in the Troubles, same context, in the 1990s, and beautiful, heartrending movie with Cillian Murphy and Liam Neeson, in which we've got plenty of IRA and we have a central trans character. So Neil Jordan has carried off the incredible feat of directing two movies about the guerrilla wing of Irish nationalism and trans individuals.
That is a niche. That is a niche content bucket, isn't it? And there's another thing you brought up about, which I think is a great point, about war weariness, because Stephen Rea in this movie, who's really, really very good in this movie, he has that kind of jaded weariness about him, doesn't he? He's kind of like exhausted, which I think is a good point. Another point I wanted to mention is that when this movie was released in 1992, it originally did very poorly in the UK box office, partly because there was a bit of a debate about how we are showing IRA members on screen. It was felt that this movie was perhaps a little bit too nice to them, blah, blah, blah. I won't go into that now. But what happened was it was picked up by Miramax, the production company, which was a young company then, and they brought it into the States. And through an ingenious piece of marketing where they inserted a title card at the end of this movie saying, basically, please do not reveal the twist to your friends. At the end of the movie, in between the end of the movie and the credits, they inserted like a text saying that, and so it kind of came through word of mouth, and it had this massive revival in the States. Makes more than I think 70 million in the States against a budget of £2 million pounds, and then it's nominated for 6 Oscars off the back of that, and wins one for best adapted screenplay for Neil Jordan. So it's interesting that it was the US market that made this movie. Talking about war weariness, it appears that UK audiences only really took it seriously after it came. It was re-released after it did well in the US.
That's fascinating. And when you consider in the early to mid-90s, the ridiculous situation in which kind of the British establishment, political and media, tends to tie itself up in, whereby you couldn't, and I very strongly remember this, like Gerry Adams's voice was not allowed to be heard on British television.
Yeah. Yes.
Brilliantly parodied in the Day Today, where they get Gerry Adams to suck on helium. But like you'd have to have an actor speaking his words, and this kind of ridiculousness of that situation. I can well believe that the hysteria around militant Irish republicanism would have sullied its success in the British box office at that unique and slightly strange time in British-Irish relations.
Yes, it's almost impossible to sort of imagine now, isn't it? That I remember Gerry Adams's voice having to be manipulated. It just seems insane now. Talking of accents, I've got a nitpick about Forrest Whitaker's accent in this. Maybe we'll come on to that a bit later. In fact, let's come on to that now, Bryce. Should we go on to our list of questions that we ask of every movie? So, first of all,
how about that?
The working title of this movie was The Soldier's Wife until, Bryce, guess who said that The Crying Game would be a better title? Your friend and mine, Stanley Kubrick. I'm delighted to get yet another Kubrick reference into the movie, into the podcast. Apparently, Stanley Kubrick gave Neil Jordan the idea because he said people will expect a war film if you call it The Soldier's Wife. That's our bit of trivia, which actually is quite interesting.
Well done, Stan.
How about that?
Did you find this too long, too short? I found it just right, this movie.
Yeah, I thought it was just right, actually. Yeah, it was neither like an enormous sort of member or a very small. Are we talking about the Willy?
Sorry. Oh yeah, you see, it's a minefield. It's a minefield. There's so many trans issue mines that we could step on. Let's quickly move on. Who was your favorite character performance? There's some great performances in this movie. Who was your favorite?
Oh, it's got to be Stephen Rea. He's just, I remember during lockdown watching you could watch theatre because the awful things about lockdown is you can go anywhere, do anything. You certainly can go to the theatre, and they were streaming like older performances at one stage from one of the London theatres, and he was doing a performance. I forget the name of the play now, where he played someone from the opposite side of the political spectrum. He was playing an Orangeman, and he was just brilliant. And I thought, wow, because everything I'd seen Stephen Rea, and he's so, I think understated is the word. He's kind of understated, and yet in this other thing, he was playing a sort of foaming at the mouth kind of Ian Paisley-esque kind of Orangeman. And I thought, wow, what a brilliant and versatile actor, and I think he just gets it just right here. Like you say, he looks exhausted. There's all these issues, aren't they, of identity, duty, responsibility, love, and like the whole. To come back to your point about like the historic stuff, it's all kind of the mark of a great actor. Somehow, in just his physical acting, he seems to sort of embody all those sort of tensions and contexts. If that doesn't sound too wanky,
No, but no, I think it's a great performance, and it's interesting that you say that because I've only seen him in this and Michael Collins, and he basically plays pretty much the same character in Michael Collins, this downbeaten, world-weary actor. And I was thinking, can he only do that? But it's interesting to hear that he's much more versatile. I think he gives a brilliant performance in this. I have to take my hat off as well to a shout-out, Bryce, to the casting director, Penny Dyer, for finding Jaye Davidson, who plays Dill.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, hell of a job to find someone who could pull this off, because the scene revolves around the fact that, you don't see this coming. And also to find someone that... so Jaye Davidson had never acted before. He'd never acted before this movie. It's his first time. Gets an Oscar nomination. And also, isn't it amazing that they managed to find someone with... the opening scene, you see that long shot that goes across the bridge, and we see the fairground in the background. And one of the title cards says... one of the text credits says, introducing as Dill... Jaye Davidson. So they found someone with a name where it's also sort of an androgynous name. Because if it'd been called like John Smith, it would have completely given it away.
That is fascinating. I didn't know that. And coming back to your point about how well this would be received today, I think we're living in a very sort of transphobic age. But had this been released maybe 5-8 years ago, maybe someone like Jaye Davidson would have won an Oscar. In terms of, in some ways, maybe this was a bit too early for that form of acceptance. And it's a great performance. I think you were telling me, though, that after starring in a couple of other movies, that Jaye Davidson sort of hung up the boot from acting, right? And
he was found for this movie, and he identifies as a man, as far as I'm aware, and always has. I know that's another mine I could step on. And then he basically was asked by a friend of the podcast, because we did one of his films, which is absolutely terrible, Roland Emmerich, to be in Stargate. And he said, all right, I'll do it for $1 million, because he didn't want to act. He was not interested in acting. Roland Emmerich accepted. So he stars in Stargate as the sun god Ra. And that's it. He only did The Crying Game and Stargate. That's it. But if you get £1 million in 1994, I think Stargate comes out, then you don't have to do a lot more. And he said that he hates the fame. That's why he doesn't want to act. And I take my hat off to Jaye Davidson for doing 2 and then saying, I've had enough of this.
That's right. And I take my hat off to his performance here. And it's because it's a very strong performance.
We also get Miranda Richardson, who I always think of as Queenie in Blackadder, who gives a pretty good performance. I think the accent is on point, definitely, which is something we can't say.
She's effectively Dolores Price, let's be honest.
Yeah. But we can't say that for Forrest Whitaker, whose English accent is all over the place in this movie. And I've got to say, isn't it a bit of a weird choice that he's kind of, physically, Forrest Whitaker does not look like a soldier, does he?
What, because he's black or because he's fat?
No, because because he doesn't have the physical, I don't know what you would say, his gait or whatever. In this movie, he doesn't walk like a soldier. He doesn't look like a soldier. Physically, he's quite large. That's what I mean. Let's not get into the cricket flashback scenes. I mean, I can't tell a bouncer from a Yorker. I'm not a cricket expert, but my God, that man has clearly never played cricket before when we have these flashbacks.
They're quite art house, aren't they? The cricket flashbacks where he's bowling. And it made me think of other stuff broadly of this period, like, or a little bit earlier, like The Singing Detective. Have you seen that with Michael Gambon? This kind of real art housey type British cinema sort of pieces from that kind of era. Does it work? I'm not sure. Certainly, talking about his accent does, could be the English cricket county championship, couldn't it? The amount of counties it straddles in terms of its dialect. But yeah, look again. I think it's important to say like that's brave bit of casting to cast a. I think in some ways to cast a black fella in that role, and it's quite important. Again, we're discussing stuff about identity and the time that was in it, etc.
There are a few characters though, that you mentioned the flashback cricket scenes, which for me, I don't know. I don't want to say they don't work. I think it's kind of its time, to use that terrible expression. They are kind of ridiculous, I think. There's also like a couple of completely cartoony characters. You've got Dave, who's Dill's, I don't know, a sort of abusive boyfriend.
That's a great word. He is cartoonish, isn't it? And these sort of off Dave. And
the Mr. Davro character, he comes to the construction yard in a double-breasted pinstripe suit and is like, "Oh, bloody Paddy," and so on. It's another sort of comic character.
Tory, the eternal Tory. Yeah.
Yes, although that guy he's called Tony Slattery, and his parents are Irish, so that's a bit of trivia for you. What's your favourite scene then, Bryce, in this movie?
Come back to me on that and go on. What's your favourite one?
I haven't actually. I've not written anything down in my preparation for this. I think it. I suppose. I don't know. It's a difficult one. I mean, there's obviously the twist that is kind of like cinema legend, but I suppose I don't know. I still find it difficult because I think the reason why this movie works so well, and I would like to get your opinion on this, is because it has a well acted, well directed, pretty tight script, and a lot of the scenes are kind of, they're very believable, and I think that's why it works. So I can't really pick one out. I can pick one out. I've obviously picked out the cricket bowling as my least favorite scene, but so for me that's why it works.
Yeah, I guess in terms of shock value, when he does get run over by the Saracen at the start, it is quite shocking, and I think that works. Because again, things like that happen in armed conflict. Accidents like that happen all the time, don't they? And it's quite believable, I suppose. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think of the conservatory where they're getting to know each other? It's seen better days, hasn't it?
Yes, I don't understand why it explodes. That's my point. I think it's this period in 90s movies where they think they've got to have at least one large explosion. There's absolutely no reason for that greenhouse to explode.
Why didn't they call it the exploding conservatory?
Well, I read this was almost shut. The production of this movie was almost shut down a couple of times.
Why?
And it was the budget was so tight that apparently the what do you call them? The person in charge of all of the clothes, can't remember the official title, was lending Jaye Davidson her own clothes because there was no wardrobe budget. Wow. And yet, Bryce, they find the budget to blow up the greenhouse completely unnecessarily. Just saying. Bryce, what would Brian Clough have made of this movie? What a question this is.
I don't know what Brian Clough's thoughts were on the Irish revolutionary struggle. I do know that...
Or the trans issue.
I can imagine what, as a man of his time, what they might have been on that latter issue. He certainly, I know, Cloughie was more left-wing. I think we've discussed this than one might perhaps have expected. However, I wouldn't wish to speculate.
I've seen a few things in the changing room, but I've never seen that. Who should do the DVD commentary?
I think, actually, although this is a little bit sensitive to Stephen Rea's personal life, it would be great to have a narration by Dolores Price, his legendary IRA spouse of 3 decades, who goes talking about ripping off Frank O'Connor. I think Miranda Richardson's character is so clearly ripping off Dolores Price. How did she feel about being immortalized? I mean, to come back to your point about favorable representations of the IRA, it absolutely is not, is it? They're not. It's not as if any neutral watching this, it would be like up the Ra rooting for the likes of Adrian Dunbar and psychotic Miranda Richardson. I mean, I don't think it's a very favourable portrayal at all, really. Do you?
Well, no, I think it's in contrast to the British state's portrayal of terrorists as, never negotiate with terrorists. They're just, demonic entities that don't have a soul. And I suppose vice versa, IRA obviously portraying soldiers as people who are, just there to kill people, blah, blah, blah. I think that's the point of the movie. We don't need to go back on that. The best companion film. Have you got anything for this? You mentioned, what is it, Breakfast on Pluto?
Yeah, I think that would have to be the companion movie, which is it's a great watch, actually. Again, it's a fairly short movie set in up in Omagh during the Troubles, the terrible bomb they had there in the late 90s, and slightly sort of, I mean, one issue I do have with some Neil Jordan pieces are this, he does suffer from the sort of disease of sentimentalism occasionally. So Breakfast on Pluto is a bit more of a sort of, I suppose, a sentimental. Well, actually, this is a heavily sentimental movie, isn't it? Really, the cry. After watching this movie, that song is just going around your head for at least a fortnight. I don't know, it was for me anyway. So yeah, that's definitely a good companion piece.
For our Hall of Fame, I want the picture of Forrest Whitaker in his cricket whites that he's got in his wallet, please.
Yeah.
Or maybe Dave's full-blown 90s jumpsuit with lilac piping. That would be proud place in any hipster's wardrobe. We've mentioned
now, Dave is. I think some say she says, "F off back to Essex." So
yes,
is Dave? Do you think now living out his senior years in Essex? Did he? I'm imagining he voted Brexit. I'm not sure. What happens to that character is my question.
I don't know, but I mean, we made the point that he is a cartoony character and he is way over the top.
Yeah.
But I suppose he's only in a couple of scenes, and you need to know very quickly that he's an arsehole. And this movie does that. So I suppose that's the point of his character. What would happen in the sequel if there was one? That's an interesting question, because there's an alternative ending to this film, which you can find in very low quality online.
Go on.
I don't know if you've come across this, but basically they're having problems with funding, and Neil Jordan had to write a ending that he basically knew they wouldn't use, because they looked at the original ending of the filming, the funders, and they said, no, this doesn't work. So there is an alternative ending, which is terrible, where basically Stephen Rea gets away with it, and the end shot is them walking through, it really is this bad, there's snow coming down, and Stephen Rea and Jaye Davidson are walking through London, and they're talking about how they're going to go and live in the sun in...
Hang on, I actually forgotten, how does it end?
There's a scene where Stephen Rea's in prison because he's taken the rap for the fact that Dill has killed Miranda Richardson's character. So he's in prison. He's doing time for, I think it's about 6.5 years.
Yeah.
And she comes to visit him, and he recants the story about the scorpion and the frog. Again, saying that, it's the identity thing. Is it in people's natures, or is it just in the category that they're put in makes people behave in a certain way, I think is the point.
Right.
Much better ending. But apparently, it actually would have ruined this movie if you have a look, listeners and viewers, to that ending. It's very poor. So, but in that world, they go and live in Barbados or something. It's terrible. Pedant's Corner, Bryce. When Dill is crying in the bar, tear streams appear at the back of her eyes. Tear ducts are at the front of the eyes, so tears would never flow from the back of the eyes. Now, when this person has written this, I presume what they mean is that the tear is appearing at the wrong side of the eyes, because I don't think if the back of the eyes is in your skull, isn't it? So no one's crying into their own skull, you'd hope.
I'd never pondered on that before. That's going to keep me up tonight. Yeah, okay.
Have you got anything for Sude's Corner? There have been a few. I haven't myself, but there are a few. There's obviously a lot of essays written about, because there's a lot of societal issues within this movie. Did you get anything for Sude's Corner?
I didn't actually have time to mine JSTOR, which is that great academic database, because I'm sure that of all movies we've discussed, this one has given some academics of the sort of film studies persuasion absolute harvest. But I sort of deliberately avoided some of that stuff. I think that the one thing I would recommend for readers, if I could occupy Sude's corner myself, is to read the Frank O'Connor book or see the play Guests of the Nation, because you'll see the parallels immediately.
What are you giving this out of 10, Bryce? Sum up The Crying Game for us.
I think it's a bold and historic movie, and I think it's, as you said, pretty tightly scripted. It comes in two parts, both of which I think work pretty well in their own respects. And I don't like some of the sentimental excesses of Neil Jordan, but I just do like Neil Jordan as a director. I just feel with his movies you can't take your eyes off them. And so I think for this one, I would give this a 7 out of 10.
I've given it an 8. I think it's a really good movie, and I think that's shown in the fact that it's shifts almost very seamlessly from a political thriller to a sort of a romance intrigue, and that's not an easy thing to do. You've got this whole first act when they're in the infamous greenhouse. And then to shift that into what is, I don't know what you would say, human interest story or something, is done very, very well. I think the cast is really good in the most part. I think there's, I always think, I'm just thinking about some of the accents, and one of my favorite, just as an aside, I don't know if you've seen the film Ronin, where Jonathan Pryce, who we've done on The Two Popes, Jonathan Pryce is doing a Northern Irish accent, and they're talking about I don't know if you've seen the film, Bryce, but they have this. They've got to try and get this case, and there's a MacGuffin basically, and they have to try and get the case, and he's just basically for like an hour and a half. The accent goes all over the place. Jonathan Pryce is going, the case, the key. You got to get the case. The case. Where's the case? Get the damn case for an hour and a half. So I have to say that the Northern Irish accent, which is a difficult accent to do for many actors, I think, is done well in this movie. So circling back, I think it's a really good movie. I've given an 8 out of 10.
Can I just hop back into Sude's corner for 1 second?
Yes.
I just out of chance yesterday evening found myself watching BBC 4 fairly late at night, and I found myself watching a movie which I could recommend as a companion, actually, called Crossing, which is the story. It's a Georgian movie, all about a Georgian late middle-aged former schoolmistress who decides to cross the border from Georgia to Turkey to roam the streets of Istanbul in search for her trans niece, who is working as a sex worker in the back alleys of Istanbul. And to fully occupy Sude's corner, I just feel that what we've been describing tonight is intersectionality in terms of the various identities and discriminations people face. And I thought that movie last night, exploring as it does issues of race, gender identity, and sexuality, was a nice companion piece in terms of exploring those questions of intersectionality. I did have to switch over when Match of the Day came on, but I did get back to it later this afternoon. So it's a good old companion piece there.
It's because it's in your nature, Bryce. The Scorpion wants to watch Match of the Day. When he said Georgian movie, I don't know whether anyone listening also thought you were talking about 18th century England. When he said it was a Georgian movie, no. I thought it was like...
I mean, as in the
set in Bath or something.
In the Caucasus, where...
right. Okay, that kind of Georgian.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much, Bryce, for joining me. That was a great episode. Don't forget, if you're watching this on YouTube, please leave us a like and leave us a comment and subscribe. That helps us fight against our algorithmic overlords. That's the only way that we can get out there, especially when we kind of, we're free talking on this podcast. We don't try and avoid phrases that don't play into the algorithm, because we want to bring you our thoughts as raw as possible. So if you can give us a bit of a help there, that'd be really really helpful. If you're listening on a podcast platform, if you give us a positive review, that helps us massively. Thank you very much. And we'll see you in the next episode of the Historical Movies Podcast.